Okay, you're in for, I think, a treat, because I listen to these guys all the time, and I like what I hear, and I'm very proud of them as some of our top students, and there's more of them, but today we have a fabulous four right now. So, so we have on piano Julian Lay. And Julian's in our jazz program anyway, and Jonah Levine on trombone, and Owen Clapp on bass, and Philip Magnez on drums, and maybe you guys should just play a song and then we'll talk. We want you to talk to the students, these other students, and kind of talk about what you're doing. But maybe just play a song, and then we can get some, and then we can talk about it. Whatever you like.
If it's an F, that's cool. 2.5. Count up.
Yeah, for sure. It's great.
Count up.
Okay. One.
questions. But I'd like to start out with a question, okay, for all of you. Most of the people in here have now, you just witnessed their ability, which is really high, obviously. You guys have really great ability, and you could probably go into classical music if you wanted to. My question is, why have you chosen jazz? Part two of the question. What is it about jazz that's so great to you?
Well, I actually started off classical, and I mean, I enjoyed it and all, but I finally discovered jazz, and the thing that was most appealing to me was the fact that most of it is improvised, meaning instead of like just reading music, it's straight up what's coming out of your head, then you translate it on your instrument. So like, it's a form of expression, and that's something that's really great about it. And on top of that, like there's this interaction between like musicians, like while you're playing, it's very cool and spontaneous. Like it's never gonna sound the same twice. It's just everything's always happening on the spot. Like if I hear him do a slide up, I'll be like, ooh, I'll do that too. You know, like, and then just stuff like that. And then you heard the drummer take it out a couple of times. Like he'll just be doing all this crazy stuff. Like, and I'm like, all right, let's do it. So, you know, so it's just very expressive, and like sometimes like your personality really shows in your playing sometimes too. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with everything he said. It's a style of music where you can really express yourself, and you can kind of just it's all about improvisation. Like you said. Yeah, and like he said, every time you play a song, it's gonna sound different. You're never gonna play the same thing twice, and I think that's something that's really cool. But in addition to what Julian said, I also find that jazz lends itself to other styles really easily. So with classical music, you really, it seems like, I mean, I'm not a classical musician, but it seems like a lot of classical musicians really master their instrument and their technique really well, but they have trouble picking up things with their ear sometimes because they don't practice it as much. A lot of times with classical music, you have just sheet music and you're used to reading it. But I've been doing a lot of like other things besides jazz this year, like a lot of hip hop and stuff like that. And I find that because I've been trained in jazz and I'm used to kind of creating things on the spot, I'm able to come up with things without sheet music, and I don't have to rely on someone else writing a part beforehand. So that's another thing.
Yeah, I also agree with what both of them said. I started out as a classical musician as well. I played cello and I played classical bass for a little while in high school. And yeah, I sort of had the same frustration about just reading music. I think once I started playing electric bass in middle school and started to realize that you actually didn't have to read sheet music, you could actually play by just sort of playing with your ear and playing with other good musicians. That sort of opened up a whole new world of like creativity, and I think one of the things that's most attractive for me is that you can take, like we all sort of had this common language. We all learn scales and we learn arpeggios and we learn some of the same things that classical musicians learn. But then we get to use those scales and those different techniques that we learn in different ways, and we get to be creative with them. And that's one of the exciting things for me, is having the freedom to, having a lot of knowledge and then having the freedom to make lots of creative decisions spontaneously. So.
Oh, that's right, I do. Of course, I agree absolutely with everything these three guys just said. One of the things that I appreciate, especially in jazz, is, like Julian said, the interaction, being able to, at any moment, and preferably at every moment, be able to tap into your creative juices. And for me, it's also about a conversation happening, and especially with these guys, as you can see, there's always something happening, things going back and forth, slide down the trombone. And one thing also about jazz is that there's also a big part of vocabulary that you have to learn. Like Owen said, this common language that we have in order to be able to communicate correctly. And that kind of vocabulary also has many, many forms. And so as jazz musicians, we do have to learn this vocabulary in the same manner as a classical musician will learn his repertoire, but we also create something from that. As far as my personal experience goes, I started off playing jazz drums, but I also did several years of classical percussion, and I felt the same things these fellows here felt. And being a classical percussionist can sometimes be very, very boring because you have to sit at the back of the orchestra and count maybe 300 bars sometimes to do your 2-bar triangle solo. Yes, I have done that. And so that is why I really appreciate jazz, because it's spontaneous, it's creative, and it's really in the moment.
I have a question, then I'm going to open it up to the students, or maybe you'll play another song. But you just played a jazz form that is very common. It's been played maybe millions of times by different musicians before you, and I'm sure you've played it many times, you've heard it many times. So, as being young musicians, what do you do when you're playing a form like the one you just played, just a blues, in a way that does it in a way that to you is a new way of doing it? Or is that an issue at all? In other words, the question of the relationship between the way you're playing it and all the people played it, before you.
Let's see. Well, of course it's going to sound different because we're all different people. and
Yes.
So every time you have a different set of musicians play, it's going to sound different no matter what. But because we also study up on all of us, like we all listen to old records and like jazz records, so we're all like a little bit influenced by them, but it all comes down to us having our own style. So it's just going to turn out different no matter what, I think.
I think it.
Yeah, I don't think it's something you really have to worry about as a jazz musician because, I mean, like Julian said, something new is going to come out every time. Like a lot of times in old recordings, you'll see they'll have like the original take and then they'll have like an alternate take, and it sounds completely different, even though they're playing the same song, same head, same tempo, same musicians. It's completely different solos. It sounds completely different. So I think it just kind of comes. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. Even something that a lot of jazz musicians do is transcribe other people's solos, or like learn solos that other people have done. And one of the interesting things is like even when you learn it really well and you play it back, sometimes you'll play it slightly differently than how it was actually played on the record. So even there, you get sort of a sense that things are never going to be the exact same when you perform jazz.
I really don't have much to add to what these guys said because it's really on the spot.
But you changed the way you played. You changed your instruments while you were playing several times. Is that something you were doing?
Oh yeah, I guess that's kind of a spontaneous thing. I have like these instruments. There's sticks and there's mallets and there's brushes, and I use them to get different colors on the drum set. Brushes, you can brush the drums. Initially, I think the first brushes were fly swatters, fun fact. And these mallets, these are actually from when I used to do orchestral percussion. These are timpani mallets, and you can get a very warm and full sound. And sometimes I try to get the drums to sing a little bit. It can appear as kind of a different concept, the drum singing, because it's not really a very melodic instrument, but the concept actually traces back to several millennia in Africa. Has anybody ever heard of talking drums? You put them, exactly, these guys know what I'm talking about. You put them beneath your elbow and there's a tension system and you can make the pitch bend. so you can get a certain forms of expression out of your drum set that most people for some reason don't do. But one of my favorite drummers, whose name is Ari Honig, does that, and he will play melodies on the drum set, and I think that's a very fun thing. Something like that. Anyway, so I guess that's a way of being spontaneous and I hope creative while performing.
Very good. Thank you. So some questions around. Let's see over here.
We talk about like quoting when you're improvising and like referencing other like songs. Do you guys, when you're playing in a jazz setting, reference like old tunes, or are you guys referencing newer stuff that maybe older musicians might not reference in your improvisations?
I think, well, when I quote, it's, well, first of all, it's spontaneous, and sometimes it's like, it comes up because I hear someone else play something that sounds similar. So like, he could be like, dang, 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 dang. I'll be like, ah, twinkle, twinkle, little star. I'll play twinkle, twinkle, little star.
That's the kind of stuff I do too.
Sometimes it can be done as like a musical thing, or I feel like sometimes it's just kind of to get the audience worked up a little bit because they hear something they recognize, so you get that connection, and that's real important. So, yeah.
Just a quick question and a comment. Question is what the name of that tune was, and comment just that you guys sound great together, and I loved your chemistry and how you were so happy to be playing with one another, and your smiles, and you were just having so much fun. You know, as an audience member, I could, you know, a musician, I could see that and appreciate that. But the name of that tune?
It's Bags Groove. And,
Milt Jackson, the vibe player.
Bags Groove. Bags Groove.
Based on an F minor pentatonic.
Yeah.
And that was, by the way, just a little footnote to that. It's called Bags Grooves because the nickname for Milt Jackson was Bags. And that's the whole story why that happened. But anyway, that was his nickname.
Isn't it because he never got any sleeves, so he had
Yeah.
he had bags under.
Yeah, he did have a few bags.
I guess on the names of songs, I'm a terrible drawer, but sometimes I like to draw. And whenever I intend on, like, you know, whatever I intend on drawing, it like never comes out that way. Like, how is it, like, I've always been curious about like the names of jazz songs because it seems, you know, so like, you know, amorphous. Like, it's like, oh yeah, I'm intending to do this, but then like when you, like, then you name it and it's like, well, it doesn't, I don't know if it really reflects that or not, you know? Like, what do you, I don't know, what's the process of naming a song for you guys?
Well, one of my songs, I called it Undecided.
No, you
but
didn't.
I spelled it wrong, and it's spelled uncidized, so I was like, yeah, that's kind of cool, I'll just keep it. So sometimes it's just random, you know? Like, that was one of them, and then one of them I didn't have a name for it yet, and I was playing, I looked down my shoes, I was like, crap, I'm wearing orange laces. All right, I'll call this one Orange Laces. Like, that's as far as my process goes, but sometimes it gets deeper than that. Like, I'll make a song and I'll envision a scene. Like, there's this one where I envision like some girl getting lost in the forest, like Alice in Wonderland, you know? And so I call it Forest Girl. But yeah.
To rebound on that. Oh.
Did you have a question? Yeah.
I don't really know music or jazz at all, but what I was intrigued about was the interactions between you, the eye contact, and so I was wondering, could you describe whether you have certain ways of interacting, and for example, like in sports, in basketball, in baseball, right? There are certain things that a coach at the sideline would do to let the players know what he or she wants, but you don't have a conductor, you don't have a coach. So how do you make sure that the signals that are sent by one of you would get sent and received in a way that you want?
That's a really good question. There are a lot of ways jazz musicians like to interact. And playing with this group, we're all kind of obsessed with rhythm and like polyrhythms, which is like superimposing one rhythm over another. Phil could give you a really good explanation, I'm sure. But like one way we like to interact is like, I'll like when I'm soloing, sometimes I'll like do some rhythmic idea, like I'll go with a pattern, and Phil will hear me playing that, and then he'll do some like crazy drum beat over that, and then Julian will do something, and Owen. So that's one thing is following rhythm. Another is dynamics, or basically volume, how loud you're playing. If I start to kind of build my solo, usually these guys will hear that and they'll like pick up, and they'll start, playing more and louder. And so those are just two examples, but there are a lot of other ways too.
I think the main thing is, I think good jazz musicians are always listening. And I think even without the eye contact, we'd still be able to communicate pretty well, because we can hear changes in volume, we can hear like certain phrases, certain expressions make you play differently. So just hearing what other people are doing and then reacting to it, I think is a big part for me.
Thank you. Let's have it from people who usually don't ask questions. So, the shy people. You're a shy person? Here you go.
Are there times when you guys like hit a wall or like a block where you just don't know what to play? Or if so, like how do you get out of that?
When I was starting off, that would happen, like, cause I was just getting into improvise. But after like maybe a year or two, your vocabulary just keeps on growing, that you never really run out of ideas. Like for me, like as of right now, it's past the theory. Like I'll practice like scales and stuff, but like bottom line, I try to play what's coming out of my head. So as long as I have ideas coming, which I feel like I do, I can just play them. So yeah,
I guess, what he said is very true. Usually, when you're playing jazz, you're being inspired by the people you're playing with. This is especially the case here, at least for myself. And if ever, I think it might happen for musicians to feel uninspired and not feel compelled to create something spontaneously. And if that's the case, there's always, I guess, a huge bank or database of vocabulary, perhaps not so huge in my case, but that we try to accumulate, learn the language, and so that can always come out. We can always rely on that. So I don't think I've ever played a wall where the musicians stop playing because they don't feel inspired. We're always compelled to keep on playing, and plus there's the sense of urgency that's brought through playing time and playing together. So you just have to keep playing and trying to find a way to get creative.
All the way in the back.
Over there, back there, back, over the back, good.
Yes, I know you guys are inspired when you're playing with each other and you guys play off of each other, but is there ever any type of friendly competition going on where you guys try to outplay each other or anything?
I feel like all the time, sometimes you'll see two horn players battling out right in front of the stage. They'll trade 8 bars, 4 bars, they just keep playing off each other and then just, I don't know, keep the energy up. But yeah, I feel like it happens a lot, but it's usually just friendly competition. It's just kind of a way to just absorb each other's ideas and just keep going. I don't know.
You had a question, man? Yeah, raise your hand, man.
So I noticed that you talked about hip hop earlier, and that you were quoting some Robert Glasper before, like was warming up. Where do you guys sense, as like young musicians, where do you sense the shape of jazz to come is going to be?
Well, it's. Oh wait, you guys go ahead.
Here, you want to take this one?
That's a really big question. You see a lot of different things happening now. There are people who are more into the traditional jazz as it was in like the 20s and 30s, like maybe Wynton Marsalis, trumpet player in his big band, trying to preserve like the old traditions. And then you see people like Robert Glasper doing like hip hop and like R&B fusion type things where there's still improvisation, but it's sort of drawing from like a hip hop standpoint. And then you see people who do more composed things, like singer Gretchen Parlato sort of does like some sort of combination between improvisation and more orchestrated stuff. You see pianists like Taylor Eichste doing things with orchestra, like have a jazz quartet and then have a written orchestral accompaniment. So, I don't know, there are so many different directions it can go because the word jazz describes improvised music in general. And there are so many different forms.
I would just think of a tree. It continues to grow in many different directions. And some of that fruit will fall off, and some will continue to blossom, depending on how good it is.
Well put.
When you were applying to schools, did you know you wanted to do a music major, or were you like, oh, maybe I'll do English if I get in here, but if I get in here, I'll do music? Like, did you always know you wanted to be a jazz musician from leaving high school?
Yeah, I applied to one school, and this was a school because I wanted to be in LA, and I heard UCLA had a good program, and everything else didn't really work for me. I was pretty bad at school, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I can't do math very well, I can't. Yeah, but I love music. It's something I enjoy doing, and I feel like I could do it the rest of my life. And just, yeah, so.
Well, you're doing math when you do music, by the way.
Right.
So what about playing another song? Maybe that's a good thing.
Let's see.
Play something more uppity.
Sure.
Okay.
Which one? Nah, dude, what is that?
One, two, one, two, one, two, three.
Tell them the name of the song.
That's the Benny Golson tune entitled Stablemate. Stablemate.
Benny Golson, another one of the important figures in the world of jazz and jazz history, and also, besides being a great saxophone player, still is a great composer and one of the key members for a long time of the Art Blakey group, Jazz Messengers, and had his own, what was it, sextet? What do they call that? What do they call that with Art Farmer? What was that name of that group? What was it? Some kind of tet they had. Jazz tet.
Oh.
Jazz tet. Yeah, they had the jazz tet. It was sextet. We called it the jazz tet. I'd like to ask a question, if I may. Because I know these guys, and I know their background, and I think it would be interesting for the class to know how you got into jazz to begin with. You know, what happened to make you go into jazz? I know kind of your story. Why don't we start over here with Philippe, who is actually visiting us he's an exchange student now from France, and he's going to be leaving us, unfortunately, soon, but we've been happy to have him here and with us, and I think it'll be interesting to hear his story about why jazz, you know, how he got into it and so forth.
Let's see. First of all, I come from a musical family. Both of my parents used to be singers and still are. My mom was in the choir at the Paris Opera, and my dad played for a big classical recording orchestra. So, I mean, he sang. And so there was always music around the family. They would play piano as well. When I was young, they got together this little band that they called Jukebox. It's a funny story. They would rehearse in our living rooms. They had a jazz vocal quartet where they would write 4-part harmony, kind of in the barbershop style, if some of you know what that's like. And they would have a rhythm section accompaniment. And so I'm not sure, I might have really hated it at the time. But I'm very sure that this was my first exposure to jazz, and whether I wanted it or not, I was assimilating it. And it's funny because this is exactly the same case for both of my brothers who heard this very same music, and they still can remember it very, very precisely. So I think that must have been my first exposure to jazz. And as far as the drum set goes, well, they did have a drummer in their band, and I thought it was kind of fun, although I'm not sure if I ever had this one moment when I said, I want to dedicate myself to the drum set. That happened later. And so then I started taking drum lessons and eventually started going to jam sessions and meeting musicians, and well, all that led pretty much to here. I did a university exchange last year as part of my English degree, and here I am.
Thank you.
I started on cello in 3rd grade, I think. Neither of my parents are musicians, but they wanted to get me as much musical exposure as I could, I guess. So they had me take cello for 3 years, and I was terrible. I never practiced, and it was so hard because you had to read music and you had to like coordinate with the bow, and being a 3rd grader, that's a lot to handle. So I think eventually one of my family friends who is a tenor sax player, a great tenor sax player, he suggested I take up electric bass, which is way more manageable when you're that age. It's a lot easier to learn than upright bass. So I started on that in 6th grade and played it for 4 years until I started upright in sophomore year of high school. And yeah, I think what attracted me was you can play so many different styles of music if you play both electric and upright bass. I play classical music, I play hip hop with Julian and Jonah, I play like R&B, funk. You can do anything if you play upright and electric both. So yeah, it's been a journey and progression.
I guess I started trombone in 4th grade, which is when they let you pick an instrument for the elementary school band. I mean, I chose it because it just looked kind of cool. Like, there's no real reason. And I just kind of stuck with it. I was terrible all the way through middle school, and actually in 8th grade I was ready to quit because all I was doing was the orchestra, which met at like 7 in the morning, and that was way too early for me. But then I met Marty Wayner, who's just like one of the coolest just people, like not even trombone players, but he's like one of the coolest people I've ever met in my life, and he's an amazing trombone player. And he kind of showed me that you can actually like have fun while playing trombone with jazz and other things and funk, and so I just got really inspired to keep playing. And over the summer I did a lot of jamming with Jamie Abersol, and then I joined the jazz program at Berkeley High School, and I've been doing it ever since.
Oh, wait, I have one. Yeah, so I grew up around a musical family too. Both my parents, they actually came to the U.S. on a boat from Vietnam, and their only option was to do music at that point. But they both loved it, and so they're graduates of Indiana University. They studied classical, so I grew up studying classical piano. I was a little kid in elementary school who was at the piano like 2 hours a day, but yeah. And then I actually lived in Vietnam for a year, and that was actually, for some reason, my first introduction to jazz, because I was just playing with my Legos, and all of a sudden my dad put on this Art Tatum CD. I don't know if you guys know who Art Tatum is, but yeah, that guy's an absolute beast. So he turned on the record, and then he asked me, hey, yo, how many people do you think is playing on this record? I'm like, 3? He's like, nah, it's just 1. So I was like, oh my God, I got to do that when I grow up. But anyways, like, I've always loved music. I grew up around music, and like just the idea that I can just live my life just playing music is beautiful, you know, like and you get to meet a bunch of beautiful people along the way, like just good musicians and very humble. Like they serve as a good reminder of like art, good people, as opposed to like the music business, which can get really ugly sometimes. But yeah, it's a really cool journey. I feel really blessed to just have all these really cool experiences through music. But yeah, so that's how I got into jazz.
Thank you. That's cool. Thank you. So, questions? Well, we'll give somebody else a chance now. If you're the only one, yes.
I'd be curious to know what your goals are when you graduate. The goals when you graduate. Okay.
I guess I'll take this one. I'm actually graduating this year, so as a part of my exchange, I'm graduating from my home university in Lyon, and after this, I'm actually going to start another degree at it's called the CNSMD in Paris. It's the Superior Conservatory, and they have a jazz program there. So hopefully I'm going to graduate from there and get a master's degree. It's in jazz performance and composition. And in the meantime, I'm hoping I'll get the chance to play more, meet some more great musicians, keep on writing music and having a blast.
I wonder, given that we have you here, if you want to say something about jazz in France, because my experience when I went to Paris the first time a few years ago was that I thought the French people thought they invented jazz. There's such a sense of, I say in a positive sense.
They originally embraced it.
Right. So, but that's why I used it that way, that there's a very strong sense of, first of all, you have people that love jazz or they hate jazz. It's fun to find people, my experience in between. But there's this tremendous, I would say, support that I saw there that, for jazz, especially, I was only mostly in Paris, so I saw that in Paris. But that was quite striking. And even compared, for example, to another big city where I grew up, Rome, I was impressed there was more jazz going on in Paris, actually, than there was in Rome. So I don't...
That's definitely true. I think the French and more generally Europe has always embraced jazz. When musicians started coming over from across the ocean, they were always very well received. And it was sort of a haven, especially for musicians who were facing segregation. And so I guess that culture has pretty much hung on. And I think in France we have a pretty good support for jazz. There's more, I mean, I'm not saying there's excess amounts of it, but there is quite a bit of public funding for it. And people are quite enthusiastic for it. And that's funny you said the French think they invented jazz. Now that may be French arrogance coming out. But there is, the jazz that's played in France and more generally in Europe is quite different from the one that's played here. Often it can be more experimental. There's often less of the blues in the jazz they play there. The blues is a fundamentally American concept. And I think I was reading this book by Wynton Marsalis once. Wynton Marsalis, the trumpet player, who's also a very prolific writer. And he said he read this critic once. The critic said, all great inventions in jazz today come from Europe, which is, well, absolutely not true. But it's just to say that some people do believe that because the French and generally Europeans, Northern Europe especially, they're trying to find new ways to integrate jazz into other musics and create new sounds and new branches for that metaphorical tree of which we were speaking. I hope this answers your question.
Just a little footnote to what he's saying. Again, that's an example of what one critic can say, goes into a newspaper and thousands of people read it, and then the word goes around. Of course, it's not true, but the point is people read the paper or they read a book and they believe stuff and they hear it on television. The other thing about France, I just want to say from personal experience, and you may know more than I do about this, but I know that there is a French National Jazz Orchestra. I performed with them. And I don't know of any other country that has a National Jazz Orchestra. They have radio orchestras, but the only one I know of, the French have a National Jazz Orchestra, and it's funded by the government. Boy, I wish we had that here, right? Anyway, because this is where it started. But they have and still are very much respectful and appreciative of jazz. Sidney Bechet was one of the first people that went over there and became a big star, you know, and that was way long time ago in the 20s and 30s. Anyway, so why don't we hear from the other? Your question was, wait a minute.
Oh, probably 2-3 questions back.
Right, what the plans were. Yeah, that's what the plans were.
Well, ideally, touring would be what I would like to do. Touring as a sideman in a group. Mostly what I'm focusing on right now is just practicing a lot and playing a lot. So I want to get up to the level where I'd be comfortable in like any playing situation. I'd like to do a lot of things. I'd like to teach. I'd like to do session work. But really performance is my favorite part of it. So touring would be really great.
Yeah, I would love to graduate and be doing music 100% of the time, and doing it all, you know, performing, teaching, and composing, because all three of those things are really important to me. So hopefully that'll happen.
Yeah, I mean, when I was growing up, my parents always like, even though we didn't have that much money, they'd always like find a way for us to travel as when we were kids. So that's always been a big thing for me. I love traveling, and with music I get to travel, so I'm hoping to do that after college. I'm actually about to do it in a couple of weeks. But yeah, but I want to travel and just play music, but I've also been working a lot on like producing. Yeah, so producing is a big thing for me, because a lot of my mentors have been telling me like, yo, you gotta learn how to produce, man. I was like, yeah, all right, I will. But, so I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna just run around, play a bunch of gigs, see the world. And then when I get tired, I'll probably start teaching.
Don't wait till you get too tired, though.
So in improvisation, I feel like there's a lot of listening to others. And so when you practice, you're really just listening to yourself. How do you ever put on like a record and play along with the record? Or like how do you practice like that, in that sense?
I guess that's actually a very good example, putting on a record and playing along with it. That's a lot of very good and excellent jazz musicians like doing that. It's a very common practice, and that allows you to assimilate vocabulary that's from the jazz tradition. You can play along to a certain drummer or to a certain bass player and acquire things from that. Of course, the thing that you're not doing when you're playing along to a record is communicating. So that's something that happens on the bandstand. As far as I'm concerned, when you're practicing, you deal with issues of vocabulary, which we just mentioned, and issues of technicality, being at ease on your instrument, being able to express yourself, being able to do an even drum roll and not mess up, things like that. And then when you're on the bandstand, it's a completely different issue. For me, an ideal when you're on the bandstand is that you can basically put aside everything that you've been working on in the practice room. When I mean put aside, it's just forget about it. Let it work on its own and concentrate on listening to the other people, because that's where it's happening. There's a little saying that I think resumes that pretty well. It's practice when you practice, play when you play. Right. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, just to add on to that, a lot of the learning actually comes from when you're playing with other musicians, because that's where the interaction, the communication, that's where the real music comes from. I know for me personally, when I'm in the practice room, pretty much all I'm working on is technique, because that's something I need to work on more than anything else. And that's something you really should work on your own. Just being able to play your instrument, at ease and stuff like that.
You mentioned earlier that you found like alternative ways of pushing, I guess, the levels of how you can play your instrument. Do you find that jazz gave you that creativity to push the limits of you playing the drums that way? And
Yes.
sorry,
That's a pretty
if
interesting question. Oh no, I hope I didn't interrupt you.
no.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to specify that I am not pushing any boundaries on my instrument. I'm merely imitating people who do such things. And well, at this point in history, doing things like pitch bending your drums is considered kind of a novelty, although it's been fairly common practice for some people for maybe the past 10 years. But I think jazz definitely induces that sort of creativity. When I was a classical percussionist, we were given pieces of music which can range from anything. Sometimes they'll be very strict etudes, sometimes it looks more like a contemporary drawing, but there were always guidelines regarding sound, maybe sometimes even expression, dynamics, and I think something that's fundamental about jazz is learning the language, yes, but also finding your own voice. And so maybe this is me trying to find my own voice. And I think jazz definitely encourages people to be experimental, to find new ways to use their instruments and express new things.
The second part, I was just curious if, for you guys, if you found alternative ways to sort of push the limits of what's expected, or.
For me, like, definitely, like, especially with recently, just because I've been, like, really going in depth with synthesizers. Like, I've always been really intrigued by sounds. Like, whenever I'm listening to my iPod, I'm always actively listening. I'm like, oh my God, that sound, I gotta find that sound. So I'm gonna go to my synthesizer and try to find it, and then just try to make new sounds. Other than that, it's just like, if I hear something that's appealing, I'll try to emulate it. Yeah, but stuff.
I want to ask you something. Before today, but also other times, somebody brought up, or I did, the label free jazz. So I just wonder whether you guys ever play free jazz or something that sounds like free jazz, because people here are wondering what that sounds like.
Take that one, Owen?
Let's do it.
Yeah, we should just demonstrate.
Okay.
Just play with it.
I guess for the anecdote, Owen and Julian and I recently took part in a concert that was given at Disney Hall, and we were playing very free music. And some parts of it required us to just play very spontaneously together. We were playing with a flautist, graduate of here, called Danilo Lozano. And yeah, the piece required us to play free, so just act spontaneously, use our ears, and maybe less of our acquired vocabulary in favor of something more fresh and new. So we've been doing that, but we don't really regularly do it together, but of course we can do it right now.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll try.
Okay. Let's just base it on C. Base it on C. Just base it on C, whatever.
Slow moves.
Thank you very much. I like it very much. And I have a very simple question. How did you know when it was over? That you were going to end?
I think what might have happened between us is he played something that we all recognized. Like the whole song, we were just playing random stuff. But then all of a sudden he played, and then that's Freedom Jazz Dance. We're like,
That's Freedom Jazz Dance. He
That's
played a quote
when
from
Shorter
that.
Freedom Jazz Dance.
Freedom Jazz.
So we quoted that one. I was like, that's different. It sounds like a good place to end because I can't really see him, so I can't be like, yo, let's end. So I mean, let's do that. So we all caught on. We're like, all right, let's do that.
Sorry, Julian, you changed your style like midway through the song. I noticed you were very like ambient and spacey jazz at first, and then you started going into some more eclectic, wild stuff. Did Dr. Burrell whisper anything special to change your style?
Wait, repeat the last part of it?
Did Dr. Burrell tell you anything while you were planning to?
He pointed something else to me because I've always kind of been very Robert Glasper influenced, so I tend to do grooves. Robert Glasper, he's his pianist. Like as of late, I've just been listening to him so much, so he'll do grooves like this, like just like take one tone and just keep building around it. And then Kenny Burrell pointed out to me, yo, I hear this on the bass the whole time. This isn't really free yet. So I was like, okay. And it made total sense.
Yeah, he was kind of locked into that harmonic sound, and you know, I'm saying everything else is free, but he was kind of locked in, so it freed him up a bit.
I really liked the second half. It was great. I mean, this is the first time I think I've heard free jazz, and I don't know how you can't stand it, but I thought it was great. Yeah, I thought it was fantastic.
Hey, wait a minute. It depends on who's playing it. These guys can play. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean, again, yeah, absolutely. It depends on the performance. Yes.
What was the first half? I like the first half a lot.
Someone else take it.
It was more diatonic, so it was more based on like, there was like more of a tonal center. I don't know if that makes any sense. I don't know.
Explain that a little bit.
There were notes that sounded more right than other notes. So like it was easier to stick around playing certain notes. But then the second half, it was just really like anything goes. Like, or at least that's what it felt like. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think the first part when we played, we were like in a very slow and ambient feel, and I think that allows ideas to like grow gradually and progress. And somebody can, you know, give out an idea, and we can take time to respond to that because, you know, that sort of mood allows for that, and sort of a warm up. And then when we get into, you know, more quick, fast, and crazy stuff, there you have to react spontaneously. And so, yeah, I guess that pretty much says it. Yes,
These
Professor?
guys are having a lot of fun doing crazy stuff, but the point is they can do it. They can articulate this. These are some really, let's give them a round of applause.
Okay, we got time for another 2 or 3 questions. I remember.
I'm wondering if it's appropriate to, for lack of a better word, like critique free jazz, if it's sort of your mental state at the time. I mean, I'm just wondering, how do you feel about that in terms of if someone were to judge your art at that time?
Well, in the end, it's all objective. It's like all about your opinion. It's all someone's opinion in the end. But I mean, one thing you could say is that like they're doing a good job of playing off each other and listening to each other. Because I mean, you could have like a bunch of people playing just completely random, playing whatever they want, not paying any attention to the other people, That's not really music. That's not. I mean, I guess so. If that, I mean, that's one way you could critique it. But then again, if that's what they were going for, who, you know, how could you say that's wrong? So that's one thing.
One question here.
Quickly, I just wanted to know, does it require more listening when you do free jazz, and are there actually solos in the free jazz?
I wouldn't say it requires more listening. I feel like whenever we play, our ears are always right there. Like whatever style, like hip hop, jazz, free jazz, our ears are always got to be on point if we want it to. Because half of jazz is improvising, and it's called the art of listening. I forgot, it was either you that said that or James Newton, but jazz is the art of listening. That's just a quote that we all live by, I feel. And what was the second half of that question? Yeah. There's solos when we want there to be solos. Usually someone will just start playing. We'll be like, all right, he wants to shine a little bit. Let's give him some. You know,
That also comes into the idea of freedom. In other words, there is a routine that happens normally in a jazz performance, but that also goes out the window. In other words, you take turns taking a solo. That also goes out the window. It's very free. But you remember what I said earlier today about partially free and completely free. Well, this was completely free on the second half, partially free on the first half, more free than most times though, and they were completely free but everything is free. You know, they can do what they want at any time together, whatever. And that's fun. But the point is, it's fun if you can do it. If you can't play, then that's another story. But these guys, you know, they get these crazy ideas, as Philip says, and they can play the crazy ideas. Plus, the other really great part, as Julian pointed out before, it's like this communication between whoever's playing with you. The group, this thing is fun, bouncing off each other and hearing these crazy ideas and trying to follow or chase or lead each other. It's really something. And that's what's great about jazz, one of the things.
At one point towards the end, you guys started laughing, and I was wondering, was that because it was like tense because you didn't know how it was going to end, or was it actually just absurd? Did you look at what the music was playing as absurd, or is it euphoric laughter? I was just kind of wondering where that came from.
I was just laughing because his hair was funny. No, that's not true. Sorry.
Dude, I don't know. Music does weird things to you, man. Like, I do all sorts of weird stuff when I'm playing. Like, there's been a couple occasions where I've drooled. Like,
more than a couple. More than a couple.
Just like, I'll just like burst out laughing. Sometimes I'll just be yelling because these fools are just going at it. Like, damn, all right. But yeah, it's just a reaction, you know. Like at the end, I thought it was funny how like Phil just kind of went, but I was like, ah.
Well, because that's to do with that quote that Jonah did. He quoted, in a nutshell, that's it. Anyways, and there's this ending where you basically just lay a flat downbeat, is on the fourth beat or something like that. And so I thought that could have been a way to end the song, but it lasted just a couple seconds longer. But anyway, so that creates some sort of a spontaneous and surprising thing, and that's usually, I mean, you know, when you get surprised by something or you laugh. It's like a musical joke.
I'm so glad we recorded this because this was a really great performance that these guys just gave. And that little last quote on the end, it just shows you, to me, an example of how quick their minds are. They can think of something and do it like that. It's just great. And that's the jazz gives you that opportunity if you have that ability.
I had a question, Owen, for you, because we've seen you now for 2 weeks. And the classroom's the same, but the setting for you is pretty different last week compared to this week. And I was just curious if for you, if you take something different from playing with two primary sources like last week, which to me would have been a huge honor, but probably terrifying at the same time. And now you're playing with your peers. And is there any difference, or is it all just...
There's definitely a difference. I feel so much more comfortable playing with these guys. I was on edge the whole time I was playing with Kenny. But it was a great honor, but that was part of what made it so daunting. Playing with these guys, I feel like there's so much listening, and I think we all have sort of a common, like we were talking about before the interaction, we sort of have common tastes, and we've listened to some of the same music, or a lot of the same music probably. And so it's really comfortable playing with them. I just feel like at home playing with them. So.
Well, and you held your own last week. I didn't mean it to sound, I mean, it was great. I was just curious. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. On piano, Julian Lay. On trombone, Jonah Levine. On bass, Owen Clapp. And on drums, Philippe Manez. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. That's cool, man. That's cool.